The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. I'm Camille Baker, and I'm with UCA as part of the Where Sustain Consortium. And today we're going to talk about the art-tech collaboration, and we're going to separate them out, talk about the benefits and innovations from the art-tech interaction and innovations and connection. And then we're going to talk about collaboration and the challenges and benefits of collaborating across disciplines. And today we have two amazing individuals from our larger STARTS umbrella initiative through the European Commission. And we are going to start with Miguel Girao, who's from ArtShare in Belgium, and he is representing both, I guess, STARTS as a larger umbrella, but also Vertigo project. And so he will talk about the larger concerns around STARTS, but also some of the things that he's witnessed around the art tech innovations from previous projects. And Lucas Evers is coming from VAG, which is in Amsterdam, and he's been long involved in art and science or art tech collaborations and seen all kinds of different things that have come out of those collaborations, and he will talk about those. So we're going to start with Louis. Over to you, Louis.
Hello. Do you hear me well?
They're all
Everybody hears me well?
silent,
I
so they
suppose
might...
so. No, but do you hear me well, Camille?
I hear you perfectly. Yes, I do.
And Lucas as well. Okay, so if you hear me, everybody else does. So I suppose I have what, 10 minutes?
Yes, if you could.
Okay. So you already introduced me, but for the ones that are not very aware of this STARTS thing, as we call it, as Camila said, I'm based in Brussels, but the company is actually a Portuguese company based in Aveiro, which is a city close to Porto, which is the most known city in Portugal after Lisbon. Which means that being based in Brussels, I have direct contact with the European Commission on a daily basis, as well as with the European Parliament, the Council, and all the institutions that are in Brussels and that are interested in the arts, in this context of the arts as a contributor to innovation. And this is what we've been trying to describe in STARTS, because now, so for the ones that don't know, STARTS is an initiative of the digital single market of the European Union. So the digital single market of the European Union is an attempt to make what is happening in the European Union in terms of geographic crossings between borders of goods and services and so on. So there are certain advantages for the countries that belong to the EU, taxes wise, free circulation of stuff, but that does not happen yet at the level of the digital. So the basic idea of the digital single market is that if you're a company and you have to have a service, you want to have a service in different European countries, in principle, we have to have one company per European country. So this is just, the example of what would be a digital single market that you could operate everywhere in Europe from whatever country you are in. Okay, so this is the basis. So it is, and this implies a number of things, right? Namely, what is the more important aspect to us is the aspect of innovation at economic level and at social level. So the so-called socioeconomic, and this is where STARTS fits. STARTS is an initiative that is run by DG Connect, and STARTS as an initiative has three main activities. Well, the aim, let me go back a little bit, saying that the main aim of STARTS was the integration of artists in the establishing dialogues between the science and technology sector, which in European terms corresponds to what we call the Horizon 2020, so the biggest framework, one of the biggest frameworks in the world for research and innovation, to establish a sort of a dialogue with companies and industry. This is the main aim of STARTS. So, but first phase of STARTS was the integration of artists in the context of research and innovation, meaning that these projects that now are in place, that Lucas is part of, that Camille is part of, that I'm part of, they are only possible because there was a work done in the past 5 years that allows artists to be integrated as contributors to research and innovation projects. Meaning that before this did not exist. So now is not only possible, but also it is a kind of like a brownie point if a research project has an artist on board. So from there, where we are going now is to actually establish dialogues. So actually understanding that STARTS is not about the arts, but it's about science, it's about technology, and it's about the arts. So is a little bit more wide, and specifically the connection with technology. So we look at the word technology as the connection with the real economy, with companies, small companies, big companies as well, because those are the ones that actually drive both economic and social innovation. And it is in this context that STARTS has at the moment 3 projects on the ground that support the 3 activities. The first START activity is the STARTS Prize, which is basically the recognition of 2 types of practices with 20,000 euros per prize per year. So it's 2 prizes of 20,000 euros per year that are attributed, one, to an artist that drives technological innovation. So the technology is pushed forward by the artistic endeavors. And the cases that were already prized, it was a clear stake like this. It was actually the engineers and scientists involved in the beginning would not believe that the technology could go that direction, and because of the push of artists, this was actually happening. And then the other prize is about collaboration. So it's about distinguish groups of people that integrate science, technologies, companies, and artists. Okay, but again, it's really important that to understand that the artistic contribution is one part of the contribution. So, and this is to kind of like flag the futures. So to establish references for people, mostly for the people that are running projects, to also understand what are we talking about when we talk about art, that we talk about artists, because for a lot of people in this area, in the science and technology area, it's very, very new, the fact that an artist can program, or that an artist can work with gene sequencing, or an artist that can work with bacteria. You see, so there's a lot of the understanding of what art is not as contemporary as we would like. So there's a level of communication that is there with this STARTS Prize. So with this, actually with all these activities, because as you see, we still are in the beginning. Another activity of STARTS is the residencies. And the residencies of START are not a name in itself. They are a means to an end. Meaning that what we would see as an interesting result is the full integration of artists in research consortiums. So as you have groups of scientists or universities or companies we hope that in some years, artists don't have to be in residence. They are themselves a contributor to the knowledge sector and to the innovation in technology. These residencies are the way to make the transition for what is normal in the artistic world, which is residencies, and actually to on one side communicate these ideas to some of the projects, on the other side establish references so that we can say, you know, look at this, how this work, how this not work, and on the other hand also to learn. Well, I actually already said it, right? All of this is very experimental. We're trying to understand what works, what does not work. Another activity that is actually run more on the side of Camille and the Where Sustain project is what we call starts prototyping. And the starts prototyping is closer to, say, reality of making an impact in the economy and society. So it's actually groups of people that include artistic thinking, that we distinguish from design thinking. So artistic thinking implies a sort of critical approach towards society, towards technology, mainly towards technology, to comment how technology can be integrated in why. And this starts prototyping is closer to productization, so closer to things that can come out potentially as a business model or as a prototype or as a model of social innovation, or is very open, but is really the step before implementation, I say. And this is what is happening now. What is open for the future are the starts pilots, so the pilot projects. And this relates to a call that was launched by the European Commission in the Horizon 2020 program. And these pilots are again, they call them lighthouses, you see. There's different names, lighthouses, flagships, pilots. Again, is to establish references. And the way these references, but at a larger scale. So for you to understand better, the funding that goes for a prize is 20K. The maximum funding that goes for a residency is 30K. The maximum funding that goes for a prototyping is 50K, okay? And this is the type of funding that the Commission is new to, okay? Meaning, the Commission does it directly only in one thing that is called the SME instrument. Otherwise, it does it through projects like the Vertigo project that is running the Starts residencies, or the Starts Prize project that is running the Starts Prize, or the Where Sustain. So these projects are set up to fund and coordinate these other projects. Now, the Lighthouse projects, they are projects of a bigger dimension. The two projects will be supported, and they are of 4 million euros each. And they are, for the first time, research and innovation actions. So because before, all of these projects that I described, they are what we call coordination actions. So is to create community, to bring people together, and that's the origin of we being here now, right? Many of these webinars are done, conferences, events, and so on. So this is what we call coordination actions. Now, for the first time, there's going to be 2 dedicated research and innovation actions. And this is new. However, the way artists are integrated is not as I personally would foresee it in the future, with what I already said, that artists would be part of the consortium as a group, as other companies are, or other research institutes are. In this case, again, cascade funding will be in place, and the projects will have to use 30% of these funds, so each one uses 30% of the 4 million to hire artists along the project. And I will finalize. Yeah? by saying that also these projects are experimental. And this is very important, is that the consortiums, and this is kind of a message for the consortiums that are being made, is that the call is very open. So it's also part of the consortium work to apply with an exemplary model of collaborations. How will the artists and when and which processes they will be integrated according to the research that is being undertaken.
That's great, Lewis, thank you very much. Can I just ask you if you can just give us some examples, because we've got a lot of designers and a lot of tech people, maybe some of our current teams. Can you maybe give us some examples of really successful projects that came out of an art and tech innovation activity, just so people have an idea? And successful might be that they've gone to market, successful might be that they've not gone to market, but they've made a very interesting project that furthers research or contributes to a larger context of, other research.
Yeah, I can do that, but I can also say what I think is not successful.
Okay, sure.
I think that is quite important as well, to start clarifying the lines. So I'm going to tell you about 3 projects. I start with one that I consider is not successful. And this has to do with a residency, an arts residency that happened in CERN with the famous Ryohei Ikeda. People know Ryohei Ikeda is one of the most interesting artists I've ever met. But it was clear, because I somehow accompanied the residency, and it was somehow clear that the residency was bound not to be successful. And there are some factors there that I think are learning points. And the reason why I think mostly it's not successful is not the fact that the work that Ryohei did was not good. Of course, it was excellent, right? The fact that I think, and of course that the work that is being done in CERN is very, very good, is of higher level. The difference there is that the Art at CERN project, it's a cultural program. It's not a STARTS program. So it's a program of curatorial approach to bringing artists in the context of a big research operation. So in itself is an educational process. So the Arts at CERN program is hosted in the educational service of CERN. So therefore the main aim of the projects are to actually educate somehow or communicate in a educative manner what is happening in CERN, right? But of course, when I met Ryohei in the beginning, he went there for a couple of times and says, I have no clue about quantum physics. And he got to the end and he says, I continue not having a very clear idea about quantum mechanics. So that makes me a little bit impossible to do something that is, you see. So I think the reason why he was not successful is because he did not have a clear impact in the research undertaken. So it was there, it opened the mind of the scientists, it did all that, it communicated the project outside. So as a cultural program, it was excellent. As the STARTS perspective, and this is where the point is important, is that STARTS is interested in when artists have an impact on the research. Mm-hmm. So when they change the research project or they change the research results, right? And it does not necessarily need, and I'm more and more, because we are all learning, I'm more and more convinced that this whole thing is not mainly about products and services, but mostly about innovation processes. So innovating research processes, innovating the processes themselves. And then the results come as the result of the collaboration. So you see, I think this is more or less my understanding at the moment of how these things work. So in this sense, a very good project is a project that was distinguished. So if you want to see what we talk about when we talk about STARTS, The STARTS prize is very well designed for that, you see, because you have the prizes, but we also have the honorary mentions. So you basically have and the way these honorary mentions are chosen is exactly to give you a span of where artists in this year were doing interesting things in different areas of society, economy, technology, right? That's the aim that we have when we in the START jury do the honorary mention. So it's the main thing is to give you this example. But there's one of these projects there run by I will not know the name, but you will find out online. It's a Swiss collaboration where the artists were musicians and where the methodology of the artists, the way they used the microphones, it was an environmental project with trees, right? And artists brought from the technologies they use in music, ways to listen to the trees and to visualize and modify this visualization and to improve this. And this became the core of the work of the whole research going on. Right. So it actually had a huge impact in the process of research, and it innovated the process of research by bringing a kind of like an input that comes from an artistic point of view, from a sensorial artistic, that then is reinterpreted and integrated in the rationalization process, okay? And it was so successful that the project was extended. So now, and again, and at this time, what was experimental then became the standard. So now this project for me is the reference in research because the artists are part of the whole group of research.
Great.
Okay? This is a very good example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe we can move on to talk about the nitty-gritty of collaboration and cross-disciplinary interaction with Lucas. And then if you can stick around, Lewis, I think there'll be some questions at the end. So welcome, Lucas. Maybe you can tell us more about your experience. Oh, can't hear you. Are you muted? Ooh. I think you're muted.
Yeah.
There you are.
I'm not muted anymore, I hope.
No, can hear you now.
Everybody able to listen to me? And is my screen
Yeah, you can
shared?
see your screen. Yep.
Is it full screen?
No.
No.
So that may look better.
Perfect, yeah.
So, yeah, first of all, thank you, Camille, for inviting me. And thank you for Lewis listening to your great explanation of where the START project is aiming at in terms of what is successful collaborations and what's not, aiming at changing the research question, changing the application question. I think it's interesting to see that endeavor of the European Commission going so far. My name is Lucas Evers. I work for Waag Society, and together with Camille and Lewis, I had the chance and the honor to work on some of the projects that led to the starting projects of the larger STARTS program of the European Commission. Together with Ars Electronica and the Beaux-Arts Museum for Fine Arts in Brussels, we run the STARTS Prize. Together with Lewis, I'm involved in a very interesting project called Brainhack. I will say some more about that later. But there's a number of other projects, amongst which is a project that looks a little bit like the residencies at CERN, but I think Lewis is right saying that CERN is a very difficult context because it's such fundamental research. It goes so deep, so it's hard to grasp or to make public what is happening there in terms of trying to fuse artistic research with scientific research there. But there's many other occasions where it is between fundamental and applied research, both within technology but also in other realms of research, where artists, designers, hackers, creatives come in with a very complementary mode of trying to understand the research and trying to further the research in where it's headed, or change that research course. So Camille asked me to go at a number of questions too. The benefits and challenges of artists, designers, and other creators working with technologists, engineers, and programmers. I think there is something clearly to see where curiosity-driven research brings those two different approaches together. What is difficult is the complementary value systems. I think that is a real challenge, because what we also often see in those kinds of collaborations is that the more creative people go at the core values of that technology-driven research and question those, sometimes leading to also new approaches in research, where then values such as responsible research and innovation are more incorporated in the core question of where the development is directed to. So I think it's also interesting and to understand that there is an ecology of research cultures coming into existence, which is not the same as the way Lewis mentioned culture of Ryo Gikeda working at CERN. I think if you talk about research, about technology development, about innovation, which is all related to research, you see, aside from emerging technologies or research in ICT or research in humanities, research in natural sciences, you also see things like design research, you see things like artistic research, you see something like citizen science, you see something like speculative design. All these sit in niches that I think should not per se remain niches, but should be brought together depending on the context of the research question that is addressed. So I see a lot of opportunity there, and I see what STARTS is doing at large, but also where Sustain and Vertigo and the other projects under that umbrella is fantastic, and it's fantastic to see that understanding growing within the European Commission of infusing artistic and creative views in those research questions. Being within that, I think we also observe that it's very difficult to methodologize this all, because it is really context dependent, and at the same time creating as many possibilities as possible. We will create that whole case together, that we see that those kinds of agents, creative agents within research, are needed for complementary value. Let's see how I can get, here's my next text slide. I will give you some examples later. Collaborative processes, again, like I said, there's a lot of models, there's a lot of tastes or approaches. There's the art science interactions, there's STARTS as such, which I think is also meanwhile becoming a very distinct approach that is not the same as citizen science, that is not per se the same as artistic research, that is not per se the same as maker or hacker practices. It's interesting to see something also out there. It's again a different taste. Critical making, an approach where two Canadian designer professors, Garnet Hertz and Matt Ratto, see that the whole culture behind making that sometimes is very scientific, very innovative, very technology approached in the US is driven by something they think is not critical enough. But if you look at the products of what is happening there, they could well be starring in the Stars Prize sometimes. So I think it's very interesting to see all those different approaches, try to know them, and try to see them sit in relation to all the other approaches. So on that spectrum between fundamental and applied technology research. So I want to briefly go into, and I quickly put my presentation together here, a few exemplary projects which I think are good, also a very early one, TerraVision, and also a number that we do here at Wax Society in collaboration with a number of others. So TerraVision is a project by Art & Com that started in 1996, which at that time was doing exactly what we now all know as Google Maps. Interestingly enough, they used satellite images. They collaborated with a large team of coders in order to make those satellite images get stitched together digitally, and created a zoom in and a zoom out machine. And most of it, by the way, at that time was done using open source software. Interestingly enough, recently they unfortunately lost the court case because they had found literally parts of their software, their code in the Google Maps software code. Because their code was open source, they still demanded attribution, but because it was open source, they couldn't really win the court case with Google Maps. But you see that there is this interesting field of interactions where artists, creatives sometimes are far ahead of the applied stadium of certain technologies. And artists and designers and hackers have that that Fingerspitzengefühl, that sensitivity to hack new technologies and misuse it, and in that way find new applications for it. I think TerraVision of Art & Com, a Berlin-based company which still exists, is a very fantastic example of that. Another one that is not, at least not at this moment, showing an intense interaction with artists or designers, but clearly comes from that cultural background, is a piece of hardware called Fairphone, and I happen to have one, by the way, because it originates from Wax Society, from our open design program, where we brought together designers and hackers to think about the wider use of Creative Commons licenses. And we thought, okay, it can be applied to a lot of content, but can it also be applied to design, to physical design? Well, no, of course, because content in nature is very different from design. But before something becomes an installation, a piece of hardware, there's a lot of stages it remains content, from the first drawing on a napkin to the very technical manuals that you can feed into a 3D printer that makes the object in a way. So until there, you can cover the whole appropriation process by Creative Commons licenses, and create a very different view on how you open those production chains. So Fairphone was conceived as a campaign by a number of artists and designers working at Wax Society at that time, now still be led by Bas van Abel, who was our former colleague, who said, okay, let's move it from a campaign into making a real phone. That's what they did, and I think, well, I know they have sold several hundred thousands of the thing. There's a second Fairphone now that does the thing better, but it's a real company, which is also, yeah, looked upon by the larger phone supplier companies. So Apple, Microsoft, Nokia, they all knocked on the door of Fairphone for collaboration, but they remained independent. Another project we are about to start, which is also a project that relates to looking at the values of technology and developing new technologies that also respond to other values, is a project we do with an Italian hacker, Federico's last name, Moffato, sorry, and a Dutch artist and biologist, Roland van Dierendonck. It's called Gene Co-op, which is looking at the responsibility that companies like 23andMe, where you can have your genes sequenced, don't take. So it's changing the model there into a corporation where you remain owning your whole DNA sequence, and via a new kind of contracting, you remain the ownership as it is a cooperative biobank and not a biobank organized to sell genetic information. We have another project called Future Emerging Art and Technology, which is also under the START program umbrella, thanks to Louis, in which we, again, and it's very good the way Louis expresses that. It's in a way strange that artist residencies exist, because, well, they do their work, and sometimes it's within the studio, but sometimes it's also outside of the studio, and then it's a residency. It should be a default situation where an artist is working in a specific context and not an exception in a way. So what Future Emerging Art and Technology does is give residencies to artists within emerging technologies. And here you see the result, and I'm not going to say something about the artwork you see here specifically, but something about the way Kerstin Ergensinger is working with a German, Austrian, Finnish research consortium making nuclear clockworks. She's an artist researching noise and the way we perceive noise. And nuclear clockwork developments are also about the way noise is perceived, because if you have an atomic clockwork here, it measures time differently than when it measures time here. The difference between this is noise. So there's a very interesting combination of an artistic understanding of how we perceive noise and the very deeply techno-sciences understanding of it. And therefore it's a very fruitful collaboration wherein Kerstin is not paid from dissemination money from the research project, but she is really one of the researchers, not for a residency period of 6 months, but for a residency over the whole course, the whole duration of the project. I'm very fond of it. This is one of the outcomes that is now on show at the museum in Taiwan. Another project I think is also interesting, Brainhack, which is also a collaboration where Louis Miguel is involved in, which is, Brainhack is a number of hackathons where we invite artists to use and misuse EEG headsets. And here you see an EEG headset on screen of a Austrian company, G-Tech. They make fantastic headwear for this. And what is interesting, they have been always focusing to produce that headwear for clinical research. What is interesting here with Brainhack is not only that it creates artworks that inspire technology development, but it's the whole project as such created an understanding of companies like GTech that there's much more use that is non-clinical. So they now, thanks to this project, developing a new headset that is specifically prototyped for artistic use and for non-clinical use. So for the gaming industry, for leisure industry, and for other creative uses. Yeah, I don't know how I'm doing on time.
Well, both of you have gone far over, but that if we can wrap up soon, these are fascinating projects, and I think it shows the innovation that can come from the artistic or creative collaboration with technology and science. Perhaps wind it up, and then we can take some questions and have a bit of discussion. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to show you this last slide where you see a number of the URLs of the project we are involved in. I think it's also important, also because Louis referred to that project, to know the context wherein this all happens. It's about not only creating more research, but also creating research that is meaningful for society. And that, at least in part, sits in the Digital Social Innovation Project that was also an EU project. So I would like to keep it there. Please feel free to ask me a number of questions.
I think I'm going to ask one question and then open it to the floor, and that would be, you showed a list of different kinds of methodologies. Perhaps you can very briefly talk about some of the core, perhaps just maybe around communication or
I lost.
Successful or not successful? No, I didn't. I don't think you dropped out. I was just thinking aloud. But this idea of if a team may be thinking, well, you know, we're coming from such different disciplines, what is the #1 way we can really bridge that gap? Just maybe there is no #1, but maybe a couple of small tips.
I think that is really, really context dependent. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't see real ways to move beyond that.
Okay.
I think co-creation is a way to go, which is very applied and is very useful. And I think if you Google co-creation, you find a zillion methods to go about it. I happened to have a talk yesterday with 2 documentary makers that are researching epilepsy under young people because of, sorry to come up with this anecdote, but it's interesting. Because of the son of the researcher or the documentary maker has that form of epilepsy, and was at an exhibition with his mom after his mom has asked him for years, what is it what you feel then? And he was at an art show and he said, Mom, I think that is what I feel. So she understood it's about visualizing. And science as such was never in epilepsy research about visualizing. And there, visualizing is something the documentary maker is well able to do. So what they do is make co-creation sessions where epilepsy patients work together with visual artists, and they first have a lot of talks, and then they start making something that is close to what the young person experiences. And they clearly got a lot of reactions from neuroscientists that said, hey, but yeah, you create new research questions. and they came to me, the documentary makers came to me with the whole process, and they said, well, but how can we give that to science then? And I say, you're already doing that. So it is also being remaining very good in what you are good at, and bringing that together.
But perhaps this idea of coming together and trying to communicate together about what the different issues are, perhaps on both sides. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I want to open it up to the 33 participants we have, or I guess there's 26 that are not the rest of us, the staff, to questions around art and technology, collaboration, starts, anything else in the Where Sustain side of things in terms of creative collaboration with technologists. Maybe Johnny, you can help us with that process of flagging the questions.
Yep, at the moment we have no questions in the chat box, so if there's anything you can either ask it or pose a question or use the raise your hand.
Maybe the methodology question is also something that is interesting for Lewis to answer.
Sure, yeah. Do you want to answer something around methodologies?
Yeah. Well, the notion of co-creation is something that is really relevant. Mm-hmm. But as Lucas said, co-creation has many different definitions. And this is one of the biggest troubles we have, which is when you try to do interdisciplinarity works or multidisciplinarity works, the same words mean different things to different people.
Absolutely.
And when you are in the technological field, there is even more complex than that, you see, is that the same word means something for the guy that makes the software, and it means something else for the guy that makes the hardware, you see. It goes as further as this because it's the process of specialization. So what I believe is relevant is to actually, and it's needed because the moments of crisis that we are living have to do exactly with that, with, I think, too much specialization. So from the technological side. So I guess the tip is to, because you're talking about tips, right? I think the main tip is to engage with people that want to cooperate. I am looking very much now recently to an area of research that is called science of cooperation. And that has to do with dialogue creation. You know, I go pretty much from the notion of bomb of dialogue. So being practical, so for the project people that are applying for projects and they want these projects to be successful, I think that it's very difficult, for instance, to employ very famous artists or very famous scientists, because this will bring I have a story from that. One of the well, by the way, since I think there's no questions, I can keep talking, right? I am in Laboral.
Tell a question.
I'm now in Laboral. We are opening the first Stars exhibition, which is about the initiative that Laboral in Gijón. I guess that the people from the artistic will know about Laboral. It's a very famous place for artistic development in connection with industry. And they had a program with Telefonica, which was artists in residence in Laboral and in Telefonica to develop new technologies, right? And there's some lessons learned or to be learned from that experience. And one of them is this, is that one of the people from Telefonica, Pere, that was one of the key guys in this whole process, was telling me a couple of years ago that they had residencies with very famous artists that were first extremely expensive, and then secondly, it took about a year for starting to establish dialogues between the engineers and the artists. So I think that all these processes are more for people that are coming to the system, you see?
Yeah.
There are still a little bit virgin to all this competition. I think competition is the main problem we are facing at the moment. in society, and specifically in the context that we are working on in research and innovation. So I think that dialogue is important, and to do so, you need young people, new people that are open to new things.
Well, that's an interesting point, because someone just asked a question related. You said competition. Someone's asked, what do you think of the issue of collaboration with IP? Any suggestions? Many creatives are facing the problem that their ideas are eventually, I think she means, stolen by others.
Yeah. Well, I know of many colleagues are complaining about these things. I know many colleagues that really, you know, as the people from Art+Com, there's many examples.
Yeah.
But the question of IP is a false question, you see. Because, and I've been dealing with this, and we are actually talking with the patents, with the EU Patents Office, with companies that advise on IP. And for instance, in the case of Telefonica, one of the lessons learned was to do open source, to be transparent, because from the moment you enter into IP negotiation, you enter into this world of very crazy negotiation, right? And the reason why IP is a false question is that open source is a registry, right? So it's a way to prove that you were involved in the beginning. The commons are also. Even just a publication can be the proof that you were involved in that. The problem is not that. The problem is to have the capacity to face these companies in court.
Yeah.
You have to have money to go to court. You have to have patience to go to court. You have to have the will to fight to go to court. And you know you're going to spend years. So IP is not for this game. IP is for big game with big industry. You know, you can spend 15 years for a patent that you know, even now patents, most of them are fake. They're not fake, but they are what we call preventive patents. They say we do everything, right? So,
yeah, and we're going to be covering that a lot more next week when we have talking about IP and contracts. But it's good that you brought it up, and Lucas also talked about open source, and I think we're going to be having a lot of questions about how do, you know, small creative and technological teams manage this.
Sorry, I don't want to be too excited about this, but the question is, if I have a company, right? So I am an entrepreneur. I was a startupper. I am a startupper. I like to. I have ideas for new companies and so on. What makes business is not the idea you have, is the capability you have to convince other people that your idea is good, and that is more than 50% of the job. Right. So the legal protection, I find it problematic, because it's kind of like a ghost. That is not real until you reach certain level, and when you reach that certain level, the means are there. You see.
Did you have anything to say on that, Lucas, at all?
Well, I think mostly I agree with Louis. Apart from that, for instance, for feed, we have contracts that clearly also deal with IP issues. Naming, foreground, background knowledge, the knowledge brought in by the artist in a research environment, the knowledge taken out, and I think if you create a situation wherein an artist is also reimbursed for his contribution to research, then you clearly also could create, or the situation is also there when something can go to market, the artist can choose to be on that train or not. At the same time, I think open source is a very good way, and also at the same time, this thing, the Fairphone, yeah, we made it, and there's IP issues there, because actually the innovation is not the phone itself, it is the fact that we have non-conflict minerals in it, and we have people that work on a fair contract.
Yes.
producing it. The phone itself is from a portfolio of a Chinese phone industry maker. So you don't per se have to hold that patent or the right to do that model. It's about, I think the IP issue is also an issue that you can turn around by saying, we are in this research for opposite values that have to deal with open source and responsible research and innovation.
Great. Is there any other questions for either of these gentlemen around art and tech innovation or collaboration or any other things that were brought up? I don't see any at the moment, but hurry if you have a question, a burning question. Otherwise, this whole talk webinar will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll link from it from the Where Sustain website. And perhaps some of the other STARTS projects will have a version linked as well. I'm not sure, but if you don't have any more questions, I'd like to.
We had a couple of questions.
Oh, where are they? I see the two that I've answered. Oh, there are a few more. Sorry. There are a few more. Apologies. I think the legal issue is important because the laws regarding patents can we disregard IP issues till later? I would suggest you all come back if you want to discuss IP issues next week on the 19th if you can. And then there's somebody else who said, could you be reasonable to try in your context to bridge the interdisciplinary gap between tech science, arts via calls to develop automatic approaches to connecting three categories of people, project-based and non-personally based? Do you understand that question? So wanting to bridge the gap between art and tech, arts calls via, I'm not sure. I think if you could rephrase that, I will be able to ask this question better. Apologies. I'm not understanding how to ask this question. No, there's a few others.
I can see the question.
You can see the questions. Can you answer them at all? Do you understand? The next question I see is, what I see in my team collaborators is the distinction between engineers and artists is not so clear cut. We have a film photographer who became an electronics engineer, and I have a physics engineer and computer scientist who became artists. How does Where Sustain see these kind of hybrid practices and career backgrounds? Is very interdisciplinary, I would suggest. However, gentlemen, you're welcome to also answer this question. Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's only good to have multiple disciplines because it's also about having multiple languages. The language of engineering is something that relates so much to the arts. If you look at the evolution, the evolutionary history of material innovations in art making, cave paintings, bringing your paint outdoors in the school of Barbizon, understanding crude materials for sculpture, until now recently you see people that understand gene editing as a sculptural practice. I think that brings about questions that have value for both a creative and a scientific and an engineering and a philosophical and a societal context. And that multilinguality is urgent if you talk about a need to create a larger commons where we direct technological innovations for the greater society and ecology. The donut principle, which offers the spectrum on which we have to act.
Great. I have another question here for Louis. It says, can Louis explain further how he distinguishes between design thinking and artistic thinking? That art-design divide, I guess.
Well, I don't think it's a divide, you see, because what I think historically the birth of design in the past century has to do exactly what we are doing now, right? So if we look into historical cycles, our cycle is clearly a cycle that is being repeated. So it's a cycle, right? So what gave origin to design, it was this division between arts and crafts and so on. And there's some mistakes that we don't want to commit again. So unfortunately, theoretically, there's this division between art and design, which I don't think exists, because I think designers also think artistically and vice versa. Now, in practical terms, and I am completely up to bringing everybody together and, and merge all disciplines and transdisciplinarity, but the more I work into the system, the more I see it's a big dream, but that's a different story, right? So the basic distinction I see, and it seems to be agreed upon people we are talking to, is that design is problem-driven, mostly problem-driven. So you have a problem, you focus on the problem, you go and you solve the problem, you look at the problem in different manners and so on. While the artistic thinking is more about the formulation of the problem. It brings a step back or forward, and it's about more about the critical approach to the problem. Is this really the problem, or the problem is something else, right? Of course, if you're a designer, you do this, right? Because I am a designer, right? I used to be a designer as well. So you know that you also do this artistic thinking. But the fact is that the difference is about that, is that when people include designers, they look at designers as a new kind of engineers.
Yeah.
That there's this problem. And even if you look, there's some, even in the residencies within our consortiums, it's like there's the challenge, there's this challenge, right? We try to call it a challenge. So it's always this challenge driven. While I think, so this artistic thinking should lead to a more holistic perspective. So step back for a little bit. And this is what is also reported by people, for instance, in Fraunhofer, which is a big research organization, right? Their experiments, they say, with the fact that we have an artist with our engineers really helps the engineer step back and see it a little bit better, you see? And this is also a fundamental point, because it's not just about bringing your experiments, your experience as an artist, but it's also to, how to say, for instance, I can give you a concrete example. A country that has a very, very strong creativity-driven economy is South Korea, right? And in South Korea, there's a good understanding of what it is about. It's not about having creatives around engineers, so the engineers do the same, right? Is that actually that the engineers become more creative, and potentially the artists become more engineering, right? So I think this merging between, which is the dream of transdisciplinarity, where people actually change their behavior mutually, this is the basis of cooperation, is the key. And here is, I think, where artists have a specific role, because we do that naturally, right? From an artistic point of view.
That's fantastic. I'm just trying to put those answers in the chat for people. One question that I just saw is, I don't know if we'll be able to, I think this is much more again for next week, but we'll see if we can answer it. Person says, I'm collaborating with a scientist to fine-tune and develop a market-ready product. Who will own it?
The question is simple. You have to discuss between you to define what's the percentage,
Yeah.
Sometimes I work in projects that I give away whatever. I'm not interested in the process of ownership of the product. I don't care, because I'm not interested in profit in general, you see. I'm not interested in money. I don't care about money, right? So therefore, sometimes I talk to guys, I give consultancy for free because artistically, I think it's interesting to see things out there, you see. If I see one idea that came and you see it spread, for me, it's great. But the practical question is, it's a question again of dialogue. People
Yeah.
have to all these questions of IP. You see, again, we come to the same question of competition. All
Yeah.
these questions of IP, blah, 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 are for legal purposes of confrontation. If you dialogue, if there's no confrontation, you don't need, and you have an agreement, and you write that agreement, and you don't even have to write it. If you see.
We're asking everyone to think about writing it, but I think you're right. Dialogue
you have to write it in the world that we live.
Yeah.
This is a different story. But I say that in principle, one should not forget something, you see, that an agreement, the origin of an agreement is verbal.
Yeah.
Any contract is the formalization of an agreement, okay? From legal point of view. And people tend to forget this. That's why I find it very, sometimes even sad that people are talking about property rights of something that has no value yet. And if it get a value, it will never reach a value below, above 1, 2, 3, 4 million. And 2, 3, 4 million in the context that we live in is nothing for a company, you see.
Okay, one last question, I think, and this relates back to what you were talking about previous to this. Someone's added something saying, and the engineering thinking then. So they're asking what's the connection between artistic thinking, design thinking, and engineering thinking.
Engineering thinking is problem solving.
So it's similar to design.
No, but it's problem solving based in a very precise methodology that has to do with previous experience. Okay, and I can give you a story about that if I have time. That explains it very well. Is that I was developing a technology for a performance with the department of engineering of a university. And the guy sent a circuit that was like super complicated, and they did not have time to print the board. And so the process, because it was this process of, okay, so the electrical signal comes in, needs to be processed. So I was forced to find an alternative solution. And I, God knows how, found a solution. And when I present them back to the engineers, they invited me to work for their department.
Okay.
Why? Because this is the artistic approach. You see, is that the artistic approach, and this leads to another question, which is we don't need to understand creativity in order to integrate it.
Yeah.
This is for me very important. So the engineering is a methodology that is very well studied, and you do that, right? It's clear. And if you don't, you're not an engineer.
Great. Okay, that's fantastic. We've gone over time. I have to wrap it up, but thank you so much, both of you. That was fantastic. If people have additional questions, either for Louis and Lucas or for any of us at Where Sustain, please connect with us. We're at info@wheresustain.eu, and I will direct you, or we will direct you either to either of these fantastic speakers, or we can answer the question within our own group. So thank you again for everyone attending, and it was a great talk. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Louis. Bye, Camille.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye, Lucas. Bye. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.